A powerful story of humiliation, hidden identity, and justice. When a proud admiral mocks a quiet janitor, he has no idea that the man he's humiliating once carried a code name feared across the military: Lone Eagle. What begins as a moment of prejudice soon turns into a masterclass in dignity, patience, and revenge served with precision. The cafeteria at the Coronado Naval Base was alive with noise and chatter that afternoon. The clatter of trays, the low hum of conversations, and the smell of coffee filled the air as officers in crisp uniforms laughed over lunch. In one corner, a man in a faded janitor's uniform quietly pushed his mop, careful not to disturb anyone. His name was James Washington, a man of calm presence and silent endurance. Few paid attention to him, and those who did often overlooked him as just another invisible worker keeping their floors clean. But today, the silence around him was about to be broken by mockery sharp enough to echo across the room. Admiral Grant Marshall, a man known for his arrogance and need for control, stood surrounded by his junior officers. His medals gleamed under the cafeteria lights, and his laughter carried with the weight of authority. When his eyes fell on James, something cruel flickered behind them. He called out across the room, his voice booming with mock amusement. "Hey, Corporal Broom, you missed a spot." The officers around him chuckled, eager to mirror their superior's laughter. James didn't look up. He simply continued cleaning, his movements steady, his face unreadable. But Marshall wasn't finished. He leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Or is it Sergeant Mop now? Tell me, how's the promotion ladder treating you down there?" The laughter grew louder this time, rolling through the cafeteria like a wave of cruelty. James paused for a moment, gripping the mop handle tightly. His knuckles whitened, but his eyes stayed fixed on the floor. Inside, the sting burned deep. This base was once his home. These same walls had once echoed with his commands, his strategies, his victories. He had walked these halls as a respected officer years ago. Now, the same men he used to lead laughed at his silence, unaware of the history standing before them. He had worn the uniform with honor, but life had stripped it away piece by piece. 2 years ago, his wife's sudden death had left him broken. With a daughter to raise and no will to return to the battlefield, he had chosen a quieter path, a janitor's uniform instead of a soldier's armor. It was humble work, but honest. Still, humility could not protect him from humiliation. Admiral Marshall slammed his fork down dramatically, demanding more attention. "Come on, old man," he said with a mocking grin. "You look like someone who used to play soldier. Tell me, what was your code name? I'm sure the enemy trembled when they heard it." The cafeteria burst into fresh laughter, but this time a few faces turned uneasy. Something about the Admiral's tone had crossed a line. Even some of the younger soldiers shifted uncomfortably. James straightened slowly, his posture measured. He looked up for the first time, his calm eyes locking with the Admiral's. The room went quiet. It wasn't the glare of defiance or the look of a defeated man. It was the quiet gaze of someone who had seen far worse. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but clear. "Lone Eagle," he said. Just 2 words. The cafeteria fell silent. The name carried a weight none of them could ignore. Somewhere in the back of the room, an officer stopped mid-bite. Another lowered his coffee cup, his face pale. Everyone had heard whispers of that name during their training. Lone Eagle, the codename of a classified field operator whose missions were studied in military history but never officially confirmed. A ghost among soldiers. A legend who had completed operations deemed impossible. The kind of man who never sought glory but earned it through precision and courage. And now, that same legend was standing in front of them holding a mop. Admiral Marshall blinked, trying to recover his composure. He forced a laugh that sounded weaker than before. "Lone Eagle, huh? Cute story. Did you come up with that while polishing the floors?" He sneered. But no one laughed this time. The officers' expressions had shifted, from amusement to confusion, from mockery to disbelief. The air felt heavier, charged with something unspoken. The Admiral's confidence began to crack, though he tried to mask it with more arrogance. He barked, "Don't tell me you expect anyone here to believe that fairy tale." James said nothing. He simply dipped the mop back into the bucket, wrung it out, and began cleaning again. His calmness now seemed unnerving, like the eye of a storm. The sound of the mop sliding across the tile filled the silence where laughter had once been. For a moment, even Admiral Marshall had nothing to say. He looked around, realizing the crowd's attention had turned, not toward him, but toward the man he had tried to humiliate. James moved methodically, as if time itself couldn't touch him. Inside, he felt no need to prove anything. He had faced fire, chaos, and death. He had watched the world's worst men crumble under the weight of truth. One more insult in a cafeteria meant nothing. But in that silence he sensed something shift. The balance of power, invisible yet real, had moved. The Admiral might still hold the title, but the respect in the room now belonged elsewhere. The name Lone Eagle was no longer just a rumor. It had a face, and that face belonged to the janitor who never needed to raise his voice to command silence. When James finished cleaning, he rinsed his mop, placed it back on the cart, and gave a polite nod before leaving the room. No words, no confrontation. Yet, as the doors swung shut behind him, every soldier there knew something extraordinary had just happened. The laughter had died not because of fear, but because truth had walked quietly among them, wearing a janitor's uniform. And from that moment on, nothing at the Coronado Naval Base would ever feel quite the same. The next day, the air inside the cafeteria carried a strange tension. The laughter that once followed the Admiral's every word had dulled into forced chuckles. Still, Admiral Marshall refused to let go of the previous day's embarrassment. He had felt the room turn on him when James spoke that name, Lone Eagle. For a man addicted to control, that loss of attention was unbearable. He needed to crush whatever respect that janitor had gained. As James quietly moved between tables with his cleaning cart, the Admiral's sharp voice cut through the silence once again. "So, the hero returns," Marshall sneered, standing from his table. "Tell me, did you polish your imaginary medals last night? Maybe shine up that fake legend of yours?" His officers looked around nervously. No one dared laugh this time, but the Admiral didn't seem to care. His pride had been wounded, and humiliation made him crueler than before. James didn't answer. He simply dipped the mop into the bucket and continued his work. His silence infuriated Marshall. "You think that quiet act of yours makes you noble?" The Admiral barked. "You're a liar, old man. You sweep floors and scrub tables, not command missions. No one believes your fantasy." He stepped closer, towering over James. "Maybe you fooled a few gullible rookies yesterday, but I know your type. Men who dream of glory because they've never earned any." The words washed over James like cold rain. He had faced interrogation rooms, enemy fire, and the loss of people he loved, yet somehow these insults cut deeper. It wasn't the Admiral's voice that hurt. It was the echoes of laughter from men who once followed orders like his. He took a slow breath, reminding himself of who he was, of the promise he had made to his daughter to never let anger rule him. But that promise began to tremble when the Admiral smirked and added, "I hear your little girl's in school nearby. Must be hard for her, knowing her father's just a janitor. I wonder if she tells her friends that her dad cleans toilets." That broke something inside him. James froze mid-motion, the mop handle creaking under his tightening grip. For the first time, his composure faltered. The cafeteria grew so quiet that even the hum of the air conditioner seemed loud. Marshall, sensing the reaction, pushed further. What kind of man lies to his child about being a hero? Maybe she inherited that talent, pretending to be something she's not. His laugh was sharp, cruel, the kind of sound that could only come from arrogance unchecked. James slowly turned his head, his calm eyes locking on the Admiral. The look wasn't filled with rage, it was colder than that. It was the kind of silence soldiers remember on the battlefield right before something unstoppable happens. The janitor everyone mocked suddenly carried the weight of something ancient, something disciplined. The younger soldiers noticed it first. The way his stance shifted slightly, the precision in his movements. It was no longer the posture of a janitor. It was the readiness of a man trained to act when provoked. A few officers exchanged uneasy glances, realizing they might be witnessing a man far greater than he appeared to be. But James didn't speak. He quietly placed the mop back into the bucket, nodded once, and walked out of the cafeteria. The Admiral shouted something after him, but his words faded under the heavy silence that followed. No one laughed. In that moment, the Admiral looked smaller, his authority diminished by his own cruelty. Outside, in the corridor lined with old military photographs, James paused by a framed picture of a special operations unit. His own younger face stared back at him among a group of decorated soldiers. None of his current co-workers knew that photo was real. The man called Lone Eagle wasn't a myth, it was him. The missions he had led were buried deep within classified archives. Hostage rescues in the Middle East, covert extractions from war zones, the kind of operations that never made it to the news because success meant secrecy. He had lived that life with precision, never missing a target, never losing focus, until tragedy struck. 2 years ago, a car crash took his wife's life, and in a single moment, all the medals and operations lost meaning. His daughter, Zoe, had been 8 at the time, small and fragile, asking questions no father could answer. He had retired quietly, taking a maintenance job near her school to be close, to protect what little family he had left. For him, humility was survival. But humiliation, especially involving his daughter, was something he could not forgive. Over the months, James had watched the Admiral from the shadows of the base. He had seen him bully junior officers, favor his own kind, twist promotions for those who obeyed and punish those who spoke out. He had heard racial slurs whispered under the Admiral's breath, seen honest soldiers lose their futures because they wouldn't play by his corrupt rules. Each incident was recorded, sometimes on his small body camera clipped under his uniform, sometimes in the sharp memory of a mind trained to remember details like a map. He had tolerated it all, thinking perhaps time or karma would handle justice. But the insult toward his daughter turned patience into resolve. That night, in his small one-room apartment, James opened a metal case hidden beneath his bed. Inside were fragments of his old life, an encrypted hard drive, a badge marked confidential, and a photo of his unit with the words Lone Eagle Squad etched at the bottom. He ran his fingers over it, remembering the man he used to be. He powered on his old laptop, the one he swore he'd never use again, and began typing. Lines of encrypted code appeared on the screen, his old access protocols to the base network. Every keystroke brought back memories of intelligence missions, of precision and timing. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, and for James, justice was always strategic. He started compiling data, incident reports, digital files, and access logs connected to Admiral Marshall's name. He found unauthorized transactions, altered evaluations, and disciplinary threats made to silence whistleblowers. Each file he gathered was another piece of ammunition. When dawn broke, James closed the laptop and stared out the window toward the base. His decision was final. The man once called Lone Eagle had returned, not for war, but for truth. This time, his battlefield would not be deserts or jungles, but the very institution that had turned a blind eye to corruption. And his mission, as always, would be precise, silent, and devastatingly effective. The next morning arrived cloaked in calm, but beneath that quiet surface, James Washington was a man on a mission. The world around him still saw a janitor, someone invisible, predictable, unimportant. That was exactly what he needed them to see. As he moved through the hallways of the Coronado Naval Base, pushing his mop cart as usual, every step had purpose. Every glance, every small act of cleaning was a calculated cover for what he was really about to do. For the first time in years, the soldier in him had awakened, not out of rage, but out of justice. When the cafeteria crowd thinned, James slipped into a service corridor that led to the communications wing. Sergeant Carmen Martinez was waiting there, her uniform crisp, her expression tense but respectful. Carmen was one of the few people who had ever looked at James without judgment. She had always sensed there was more to him than the uniform suggested. When he appeared before her now, carrying a small flash drive in his calloused hand, she understood instinctively that something serious was about to happen. "I need your help," James said quietly. "And once you know what this is, there's no turning back." He handed her the drive, and when she plugged it into her terminal, the screen filled with data, audio clips, photographs. and official reports that made her jaw tighten. She scrolled through evidence of the Admiral's corruption, falsified evaluations, racist remarks caught on surveillance, secret communications with defense contractors for personal favors. The proof was overwhelming. Carmen looked up at James, speechless for a moment. "You've been collecting this all along," she whispered. He nodded. "Every insult, every lie, every man or woman he's broken for his own ego. I didn't stop him before because I believed the system might. I was wrong. It's time we fix that." Carmen's loyalty to truth outweighed her fear. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. James outlined the plan with military precision. Admiral Marshall was scheduled for a high-level teleconference with generals from the Pentagon the following morning. During that call, his arrogance would be his undoing. Using James's janitorial clearance, they would place a hidden recorder in the Admiral's office, one that would link directly to the base's main communications server. Carmen would route that feed into the secure line used for the teleconference, ensuring that everything the Admiral said, every cruel word, every insult, would reach the highest ears in the chain of command. That night, under the cover of routine cleaning, James entered the Admiral's office. The room was immaculate, decorated with medals, commendations, and photographs meant to project greatness. But to James, every award on those walls felt hollow, trophies earned through fear and deceit. Moving quietly, he placed a miniature recorder inside the decorative base of a desk lamp, the same spot he dusted every day. He checked the transmission light once. Faint, steady, perfect. Then he straightened the Admiral's chair, wiped the desk surface as if nothing had changed, and left without a sound. The next morning, the sun rose bright over the naval base. Marshall arrived early, loud and proud, his arrogance restored. He strutted through the halls, barking orders, unaware that every step brought him closer to ruin. James was already in the cafeteria, pretending to mop, waiting for his cue. Carmen, in the control room, adjusted her headset and opened a secure line to the Pentagon network. Her fingers moved quickly across the console, linking the recorder's feed to the upcoming teleconference. She felt her pulse racing, but she trusted James. When Marshall entered the cafeteria for his morning coffee, James was ready. He positioned himself near the door, timing every movement with precision. As the Admiral passed, James spoke just loud enough for him to hear. "Morning, Admiral. The floors are clean. Wouldn't want your shoes to get dirty." The words were calm, almost polite, but they struck a nerve. Marshall turned sharply, his face twisting with anger. "You think you're funny, janitor?" he snapped. "You think a man like me cares about dirt? Men like you were made to clean it." James gave a small, knowing smile. "Men like me?" he said softly. The Admiral took the bait. "Yes, men like you, people who'll never rise above their station. You're not built for command, not built for leadership. You're genetically limited." The words hung in the air, ugly and venomous. "The only thing you people are good for," Marshall continued, his voice dripping with superiority, "is scrubbing what real soldiers step on." That was it. The Admiral's downfall had just been recorded and transmitted in real time. In the control room, Carmen's eyes widened as the audio reached the other side of the line, straight to the ears of generals sitting miles away at the Pentagon. They heard every word, every insult, every ounce of prejudice that had poisoned the base for years. None of it could be denied. The voice was unmistakable. James stood silently, his expression unreadable. He gave a slight nod of respect and went back to work, his mission still in motion. Minutes later, Marshall entered his office, unaware that his own arrogance was still being streamed live. The teleconference began, and as he greeted the generals, his voice dripped with its usual pride. He spoke about discipline, leadership, and the importance of loyalty from subordinates. The hypocrisy would have been laughable if it weren't so tragic. As he continued, the generals on the other end said nothing. They didn't interrupt, didn't react. They simply listened, letting him talk himself deeper into the pit he had dug. When the meeting finally ended, Marshall felt satisfied, thinking he had impressed them again. But on the other side of the door, the storm he had summoned was already moving toward him. Meanwhile, James walked down the hallway, the quiet rhythm of his steps in perfect sync with the calm inside him. The operation was complete. Every word the Admiral had said, both in private and in pride, was now in the hands of the very men who had the power to strip him of everything he cherished. James didn't smile, didn't celebrate. Justice, he knew, didn't need applause. It only needed truth. And truth, at that moment, was already louder than the Admiral's voice had ever been. The Admiral's office was filled with the low hum of static from the conference line, his polished medals gleaming proudly across his chest as he finished addressing the generals. He had no idea the silence on the other end of the call was not respect, but quiet disbelief. Behind the calm faces of those listening in Washington, recordings had already exposed every word of his cruelty. The same voice now speaking about discipline and honor had, just hours before, spat hatred at a man who once carried the Navy's greatest code name. When the conference room door opened, the Admiral turned sharply, irritation crossing his face. "What is it now?" he barked. But when he saw who entered, his expression faltered. James Washington stepped inside. No mop in hand this time, but a single black folder clutched firmly under his arm. His uniform was the same, the plain blue of maintenance staff, but there was something different about the way he stood. His posture carried command. His eyes were steady, unafraid, and the quiet dignity in his face silenced the room. The generals' faces on the screen shifted, their attention snapping to him at once. Admiral Marshall's arrogance flickered into uncertainty. "You're interrupting a classified meeting," he snapped, but his voice wavered slightly. James didn't flinch. "This won't take long, sir," he said evenly. "You were just telling the generals about honor and leadership. I think they deserve to see what that looks like in practice." He placed the folder on the Admiral's desk and opened it. The screen behind Marshall came alive with audio playback, his own voice echoing through the office. The sound of his mocking laughter filled the room. "Men like you were made to clean. You're genetically limited." The words repeated, raw and unmistakable. The Admiral's face turned pale. On the other end of the line, one of the generals leaned closer to his microphone. "Admiral Marshall," he said coldly, "is that your voice?" Marshall stammered, trying to form an excuse, but another recording played. This time of his threats to silence subordinates, his orders to falsify reports, his quiet deals for personal gain. Each clip hit harder than the last. There was no escaping it. The truth was ironclad, broadcast live to the very men he had spent his career trying to impress. James finally spoke, his voice calm and deliberate. "My name is Major James Washington. Former intelligence officer, field designation, Lone Eagle. Under General Thompson's command, Operation Nightfall, 2008. The generals exchanged looks of astonishment. Recognition flashed instantly across their faces. One of them even leaned forward, whispering to another, "He's alive." In an instant, respect replaced disbelief. The man standing in that janitor's uniform was not just another base worker. He was the legend whose missions had once been classified above top secret. The Admiral's mouth opened, but no words came out. The general's silence turned heavy and final. General Thompson's voice cut through it. "Major Washington, it's an honor to see you again. We owe you a debt far greater than we realized. Thank you for bringing this to our attention." Then came the verdict. In less than 10 minutes, the suspension order was issued. "Admiral Grant Marshall," said General Thompson, his tone sharp and cold, "you are hereby relieved of duty pending investigation. Your conduct has dishonored this institution and violated every principle it stands for." The line went dead. The Admiral's body seemed to deflate as if the air had been punched out of him. His medals, once symbols of power, now glared like accusations on his chest. He sank into his chair, head in his hands, as James gathered his folder. For the first time, the room that had once echoed with his arrogance was completely silent. James didn't celebrate. He simply looked at the man who had mocked him and said quietly, "You built your career on fear and lies. It was never my job to destroy you. You did that yourself." Then he turned and walked out, leaving the Admiral alone with the ghosts of his own words. Months later, the base looked different. The cafeteria that once buzzed with mockery now carried a new kind of energy: respect, discipline, and quiet reflection. Carmen Martinez, once a sergeant hidden behind computer screens, now wore the bars of a lieutenant. Her quick thinking and courage had been recognized by the Pentagon itself. When she saw James passing through the hallway one morning, she smiled. "They reinstated you," she said softly. James nodded. "Not to the field," he replied, "but to something better." He had accepted a new position as a special advisor to the Pentagon, focusing on ethics and reform within military leadership. His voice now carried the same power as it once did on missions, but this time it commanded change, not destruction. His daughter, Zoe, had grown into a confident young girl, proud to tell her classmates who her father truly was. No longer was he the janitor everyone laughed at. He was the man who proved that truth, no matter how quiet, could dismantle entire empires of deceit. As for Admiral Marshall, the headlines told his story. Court-martialed, stripped of his rank and pension, forgotten by the same men who once bowed before him. His fall was swift and merciless, a reminder that arrogance built on injustice never stands for long. One evening, James stood at the Naval Academy, facing a hall filled with young cadets. His uniform was simple, unadorned, yet his presence commanded silence. He looked at the sea of faces before him, men and women ready to serve, and spoke with quiet strength. "Our place in society is not defined by race, background, or title," he said. "It's defined by the strength of our character and the courage to do what's right, even when it costs us everything." The hall erupted in applause. It wasn't the applause of ceremony, but of understanding, a collective recognition of a man who had lived every word he spoke. For James, it wasn't about redemption anymore. It was about closure. The janitor, the soldier, the father, and the legend had all become one man again. As he stepped outside into the cool evening air, Zoe ran up to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You did it, Dad," she whispered. He smiled, looking out at the fading light over the base he once served and now protected in a different way. "No," he said softly, "we did it." In that quiet moment, the story of Lone Eagle came full circle, not as a tale of revenge, but of dignity restored through truth, courage, and the quiet strength to rise again when the world tries to bury you.